All right, guys, this is Jason in Savannah, and I just listened to your pitch for season 4, and you sold me. So I just went to your Patreon page, and I bumped up a tier, so I'm now a $10 Excelsior member. So I'm looking forward to season 4. Pressure's on. Don't disappoint me. See you soon.
2 men who know the angles, uncover and untangle all the questions and the webs left out to tangle. In 1962, last Wednesday's afternoon, they'll bend your ears with reckless self-abandon. The amazing spider talk, the amazing spider talk. Come swing through the air, sit back and prepare for the amazing spider talk.
Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavosden, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which definitely count.
And I'm mischievous Mark Chinacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, but the annuals don't count. Well, maybe they will. I don't know. We'll find out soon, won't we, Dan?
Yes, we will. We will. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for part 1 of a special Amazing Friends episode of the all-new Amazing Spider Talk. We hope you enjoy this podcast and that it provides an intelligent conversation between two fans and a creator as we look at the Spider-Man comic universe in a bit of a bigger picture. So if you want to learn everything we know about Spidey, why not subscribe to our show starting back with the first season?
In the previous episode, we announced what we were going to be doing for season 4 of Amazing Spider Talk and detailed all the huge changes that are coming to the show. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, go back and check it out. But today, Dan, you and I, we've got something extra special for our listeners here.
Yes, Mark. Yeah, we may be on hiatus, but that doesn't mean the fun has to stop. Today, we've invited Tom Brevoort, Marvel's Senior Vice President of Publishing, to join us on the show. Tom began working at Marvel Comics back in 1989 and has held a variety of positions over the years, rising from an intern to assistant editor, and executive editor on titles such as New Avengers, Civil War, Fantastic Four, Avengers, Captain America, Iron Man, and so many others.
He also famously worked on a number of Spider-Man titles during the Clone Saga, wrote a manifesto about the character that helped to redefine Amazing Spider-Man during Brand New Day, oversaw the transition to the Superior Spider-Man, and is just an all-around expert on the history and characters of Marvel Comics. I mean, truly, this guy knows almost everything. Today, we're going to play part 1 of our lengthy interview with Tom. We touched on a number of topics, including his own collecting stories and habits, but also how Marvel may address the current coronavirus and other real-world crises of the moment.
Great, so let's get right to our interview.
Well, now let's meet one of our amazing spider friends, the kind of guy who goes to other friends who recommend. Find out about the things they created. You'll love them so much that you wish you dated. But you're just friends, they're an amazing friend. A friend, a friend, a friend, they're an amazing friend.
All right, Dan, we are joined here by Tom Brevoort. Tom, thank you so much for joining us in I'm assuming your isolation right now of sorts.
Pretty much. It's been about 10 days.
We've been about a week here where I am. Dan, how are you holding up right now?
I'm 12 days in, I believe, or like 11 days in. So, probably about as well as Tom.
I feel like we need a volleyball with a handprint on it right now just to get mark the days right now, right? But let's actually start with something a little fun and a little tangential here, Tom. You're talking with two collectors of Amazing Spider-Man comics who have both completed the entire run of the series. And if memory serves, I remember hearing this in one interview of yours. You have collected every issue of Fantastic Four, correct?
Yes, I have a full run of Fantastic Four.
Okay, so let's talk like that compulsive need to collect here for a second. So a lot of our listeners are obviously familiar with our quests, and they are kind of collecting full runs of Spider-Man or whatever other series that they're doing similarly. So from your end, what made Fantastic Four the series for you? And, are there any kind of stories with some certain acquisitions of issues that, are kind of fun or memorable for you? I mean, I feel like, Dan has some, I have some from Spider-Man. You got to have some from Fantastic Four, right?
Well, to some degree, yeah. Fantastic Four was always, and still kind of is, my book. In the same way that you feel about Amazing Spider-Man, I've got the same thing with Fantastic Four, and have for a long time. I didn't specifically set out at any point until fairly late in the game to really collect the whole run per se. I'd set out to read it all. The very first trip I made to a comic shop. The first comic shop I ever went to was a Heroes World in Levittown, and one of the things that I found there and I got there was the 1970s George Olszewski official index to the Fantastic Four, the early black and white ones that he did in the 70s. And this was a book that showed you, all the covers and had little index write-ups for all the stories of the, at that point, 180 issues of Fantastic Four that there were. And I had started reading, with like 177. So this is pretty much everything that there was. And so, I started as much as I could buying, older issues and such. But at the same time, I was also buying, Marvel's Greatest Comics reprints of those old stories and so forth, and, filling things in. There were 2 or 3 instances that kind of led to me ending up with the full run. And the first, and it's pretty stupid, but we were grade school kids, maybe going into junior high school, was that I had a buddy whose name was Dave Steckel. And Dave was also a big Fantastic Four fan as a kid. And he had bought up, an assortment of issues and so forth. And at some point, for some reason, he did a count, and he determined that he had more original issues of Fantastic Four than I did. That while I probably had read more of the stories and so forth with my reprints and my whatnot, he had more original issues. And this became a sort of nonsense competition between the two of us, where we would go out and we would buy more issues to fill in the gaps, and we jockeyed with each other for, it must have been a couple of months, until finally there was some local show. They used to do yearly craft shows at the various malls around us. And that was one of the very few places that you would be able to really get back issues in those days. And I went to whatever the next one of those was, and I filled in my run back to 125 or something. And at that point, having been soundly bested, he immediately, ignored the whole competition from that point on, because he didn't really care about it per se. He just was having fun winding me up. So at that point, I'd done a bunch of the filling in, and over the years, I would occasionally end up with another issue here or there, going all the way back. The earliest thing I had at that point was, I think, 21. I had a beat up copy of 21 that I'd gotten at some early show. And then in 1981, my family relocated. We moved to Delaware for my dad's job. And in Delaware, after a while, what became my local comic shop opened up, which was Captain Blue Hen Comics in Newark, Delaware, which is still there. Hopefully it will still be there after this Corona situation wraps up. But even today, it's still there. And so I became, after a while, a regular customer at the shop. And one of the things that they did was, in the 80s, they had a pull list system where if you spent X amount, I forget how it worked, but it was one of those, if you spend money on new books, you'll accrue credit towards back issues. And so they, from time to time, they would have books that would come in, on the wall or otherwise. I know I got an FF11 off of their wall, which at that point became my oldest FF issue, and I got that on credit. And for the longest time, they had an FF1, and it was in like their display case by the register, and it was $125. And it's not the first time I had seen a Fantastic Four one. My first encounter with an FF1 was that first trip to the comic shop that I mentioned earlier. And the way that came about was my dad he was a VP for Chase Manhattan Bank. And he was posted at a bank branch that happened to be in the mall area that this Heroes World opened up in. So one weekend he tells me, hey, there's this store out in this mall. He didn't tell me it was the mall next to where his work office was, because if I knew that at that point, I'd be bugging him all the time to go there and buy me comics, which eventually I did. But, do you want to go out there this weekend? And of course I was, oh yeah, absolutely. I want to go out there. And so on on the trip out, I'm strategizing in my own mind, in my own head. And my strategy, I had just that summer beforehand become a Fantastic Four reader. Before that, I was exclusively a DC guy for many years. And I'd finally cracked Marvel with Fantastic Four. So pretty much at that point, I was reading DC books and Fantastic Four, and that was about it. And I would eventually branch out into the other Marvel stuff. So driving out to Levittown to the shop, I decided my move was going to be, I am going to buy the oldest issue of Fantastic Four that I can get. And the oldest issue of Fantastic Four that they happened to have there that day was number 1, which was $75. And which I did not buy. I did buy, the oldest issue that they had in sort of the regular bins. Like they had a couple of issues. One was one of them. 14 was another. I think they had a 2. That were sort of on display behind the counter. In some sort of glass case. But in the actual back issue bins, the oldest issue I could come up with there was 51. And I bought 51 that day. And for the longest time, my copy of FF51 was my oldest FF book, a real classic story. So anyway, over the years, I wound up with a bunch of the issues, and slowly but steadily, I would start to fill in the cracks. Once I started working at Marvel and relocated back to New York, there were a couple of comic shops in the area there that had older books, one of which was Long Island Comics, which is no longer there, but was there for years. It was a real staple of the area. It lasted for a solid 30 years. At one point, when I first encountered it as a kid, it was called the Batcave. And then the 1989 Batman movie came out, and DC came down on them and went, you can't call your shop the Batcave, dude.
Yeah.
But I remember it in my head, it'll always be the Batcave, because I bought a bunch of books there, and it was an early comic shop in my quasi area. So at some point on some boring, weekend, I drove out. I hadn't been to the shop in the longest time. And I went out there for some reason. Maybe I was looking for particular issues of something, or maybe I was just bored that weekend and went, I'll go out to the Batcave because it's a 40-minute drive, and maybe I'll find something. It's still there. That's interesting. And I went out there. And going through their back issue bins, their back issue bins went much further back than a lot of places. Like you could find, not just on the wall, but you could find in their bins actual, no kidding, rare books, rare and old books. And I pulled, I know an FF9 I pulled out of there. I know I pulled an FF3 out of there at a later trip. I know eventually, years later, I bought Avengers 1 that way. Whew. $95, my Avengers 1. Right before I put out my Avengers 1. So it was good. It was good timing. So anyway, so now it's the very early 90s. I'm working at Marvel. I've got, a scattering of issues up to back to FF3. And 2 things happen that make me go, okay, I'm going to just fill out the rest of the run. Technically 2.5, but I'll get to the half in a second. Thing 1 is I went to one of the yearly, quasi conventions. It was a convention, but not like a big deal like the New York Comic Con is today. It was one of the conventions that was held in the hotel that was across the street from Penn Station.
Hotel Pennsylvania you're talking about, or?
Yeah. They did them for years.
Yeah.
You know, ultimately much more of a like a comic show where you bought and sold comics than what we think of today as an actual convention with panels and cosplay and all of that. There was a little of that, but really the big draw was you got a big dealer's room where lots of people were there and were selling books. And I was going there, you know, on behalf of Marvel. Marvel had a booth at this place, and I was doing time, you know, that weekend, Saturday and Sunday, working the booth. And as I typically did, I, you know, would go out on the floor and I would look around and I would spend and I would buy stuff. And so it was right towards the end of the show, and I happened towards a dealer, and I had spent like most of the spare cash I had on me. I was down to a couple of bucks, and I found my way to a dealer who had on the wall a copy of Fantastic Four #1, and it was described as literally on the price label that he had on it. It says, you know, beat up like a rag copy, $99. And I looked at that and I went, I can do $99, but I don't have $99 on me. And this is before the day when every dealer at a show would do credit cards or whatnot. So I lit out of there. I raced down the block to an ATM, which fortunately they did have in those days. And I pulled out the $99 and I went back and I bought the issue. And so now I had FF1, you know, an actual no fooling, you know, except no substitutes copy of FF1. The second thing that happened was that a fellow by the name of Jeff Bonnevert put out a comic. It was an independent comic, and nobody remembers this comic but me, I am sure. I have a copy, and I've seen others over the years, but very infrequently. You know, if you search for it online, it's difficult to even come up with an image of it. Believe me, I've tried. It was this book called Fun Boys. And Fun Boys was an independent comic that was a story about these three neighborhood kids running afoul of bullies and having these adventures and so forth. But one of the things that they do in the course of this story is they go to the store and they buy the new issue of Fantastic Four. And one of the things that happens is in the course of the story is their tormentor Mo catches them and shreds, rips up their copy of Fantastic Four number whatever it happened to be, the new Fantastic Four, and this becomes a motivating thing to them. And one of the characters does this impassioned speech to the other, where he's talking to them about how, you know, they need to set this right, because from this point on, he's going to be known as the boy who doesn't have a complete set of Fantastic Four, and the shame of not having a complete run of Fantastic Four would haunt him for the rest of his days, and that people would look at him and cry, "Oh no, there goes the boy who does not have." And I read this book, and I was going to be going to the San Diego Comic-Con for, I think it was for the first time I'd been out there, you know, that year. And so I'd stockpiled, you know, a bunch of cash for that. And I read this book and I thought to myself, I cannot be a boy who does not have a complete set of Fantastic Four. Particularly given that I've already got one. I've got the toughest piece of that already.
Yeah.
You know, and I own, like, I know I'd filled in by that point at least back to 100 solid, maybe a bit further, maybe, you know, into the 90s or the 80s, and there might have been an occasional issue missing in the run here or there. So I went out to that San Diego with a mission, and my mission was I'm gonna fill in the run. And that was what I did that San Diego in between doing panels and talking to talent and, you know, so forth, is I went out on the floor and, you know, slowly but surely I would go around to all the tables that they had and find copies of all the issues I was missing in my price range. Something that I wouldn't have thought I would have ever done because it seemed like an impossible quest even a couple of years earlier. The most expensive book I bought, the most expensive book in the whole run, was Fantastic Four 2, for which I paid $100. So my FF2 cost me more than my FF1.
Wow.
But yeah, I filled in the rest of the run at that show, and that was it. From that point on, I was impervious to mockery.
Do you remember the last issue you got? Like, what was the final piece of the puzzle?
Well, again, they were all, because it was all at one show.
Okay.
You know, I came out with a stack of, 30, 35 books. The 2 was probably about the last, I don't know if it was literally the last book I bought, but it was probably pretty close because that was the big ticket item or the biggest ticket item. And I was comparison shopping all over that floor. But I know at that same show, I bought 4, I bought 5, I bought 6, I think I bought 7. 8, I think I had gotten earlier. 10, I might have gotten earlier. But I just all the way through, I came out with a stack of 30 or 40 books. Years later, maybe almost 10 years later, I don't know if it was 10, might have been a little longer, might have been a little earlier. I had a break-in at my house. My home was robbed, and it was robbed by some know-nothing skell who didn't really know what he was doing. But one of the things that he did, in addition to taking VCRs and camcorders and crap of that nature, not knowing what he was doing, in my main room, I had a bookcase, and the bookcase had books, comics on it, including the Fantastic Four run, and he randomly pulled out a section and walked off with it, and he didn't know what he was doing, but he basically took between FF like 21 and I'm going to say 38 approximately. And that was a little painful blow to my heart.
Yeah.
But on the plus side, if he'd gone like another inch over, he'd have taken the first 20.
Right. Or the other way, he would have gotten Galactus and This Man, This Monster, right? So
yeah.
so there was some bullets dodged, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, but I went, the next show I went out to after that theft, and we call the cops and so forth, and you never recover any of that. There's no way you're getting those books back. But I went out to the next show, and I did it again. I filled in all those books. I went to I forget. I think it was a Chicago show. It would have probably been a Wizard World in those days. Maybe it was just Chicago Comic-Con. I'm not sure because I'm a little vague as to what year it was. But I went out on the floor and I bought 21 through 38 again, just like I had done years before, walking around and getting copies. And I remember I ended up buying 2 copies of 36. And I still got the spare copy of 36 on my spinner rack here because I bought a copy of 36 and I paid like nothing for it, but it was really, beaten up and sort of nasty, or nastier than I liked. And I opened it up and I was like, I there's enough cash here. I can do a better copy of 36. So I'll buy another 36.
So Tom, Mark and I have had this, like your friend and you, this competition over the years where sometimes it's friendly, sometimes it's not so friendly. And we argue over whether or not the annuals count in our collection. And, I'm pro annual and Mark is anti-annual despite owning them.
Hold on. It's not that I'm anti-annual. I just feel that they're a separate series. It's not the same series. It's like, it's like not a B book, but it's, it's different from a cataloging standpoint. That's my argument, Tom.
Well, Tom,
right.
From that answer, I hope you get an idea of the heat associated with this. So may I be so bold, Mark, as to put the fate of this in Tom's hands? Tom, do you feel that annuals count to these series?
Gentlemen, to be fair here, the annuals count, the specials count, the giant sizes count. They all count. So you've either got it all or you don't have it all.
Well, that's an interesting answer because that means we both don't have it all. So Mark, the quest continues.
I think with Amazing Spider-Man, I don't know if the giant sizes really count there, in that giant size Spider-Man was really more of an adjunct to Marvel Team Up. But I think the annuals certainly count. If there were giant size, specials or one-offs, we did a lot of stupid 700.1s and things over the years.
Yeah.
I think those all count.
We do have those, yes.
I wouldn't for Amazing Spider-Man, I would not fault you for not having issues of Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man or Web or any of that stuff. it would really have to be, the central Spider-Man book. The black and white magazine is a separate thing. But yeah, the annuals count. Anything, if it's a core Amazing Spider-Man issue, it counts. I have a Spider-Man story that relates to what you just said. Again, going back to when I was a kid, because I had another buddy who collected comics. Again, this would have been in like my junior high school days. A fella by the name of Israel Litwack, and he and I would both collect various things, and we would talk comics and so forth. And there was, in his neck of the woods, there was a shop, and it wasn't really a comic shop. It was this place called Bush's Hobbies, and they were a hobby store. So they sold old comics, but also, collectible cards, baseball cards, and coins, and old silver. They were kind of halfway between like a pawn shop and a collectibles shop. The sort of place that you don't really find anymore quite. But they had boxes of old comics, and they would restock them every now and again. And so there was one, day or one week where Israel told me, he'd been over there and he'd found like 3 or 4 old Steve Ditko Spider-Mans in the 20s, 21 and 23 and I think 24 and 20, I'm going to say 27, something like that, which was pretty impressive to me at the time. So the next week or whatever it is, we go to we make a trip out to the place, and we're, rifling the bins for whatever we happen to be interested in. And I look in the Amazing Spider-Man area, and there's Amazing Spider-Man 25. And I like Amazing Spider-Man 25. That's a good book. I'm taking that. I'm adding that to my stack. And I do. And so I'll continue shopping. And Israel discovers that I've got Amazing 25. And he's pissed. He doesn't know if he missed it last time, like he rifled by it or something, or it wasn't there or whatnot. But clearly it's all a part of the set that he has. And what right do I have to buy it and break up this thing that he was completing? I didn't really, like that argument. My argument was, I want it. I've got it. I'm going to buy it. It's mine. Leave me alone. Except that once I got to like the final tally of everything I had, I was, no lie, a quarter short. I was 25 cents short. And my friend, my pal, Israel Litwack, refused to loan me that quarter. because he said, no, this is, you doing this is wrong. And I was, young enough and not confident enough yet to go to the dude at the counter and say, look, cut me the deal on this for the quarter, pal. I didn't do that. In the end, being out of options, I gave Litwack the Amazing 25. I said, okay, fine, I can't do it. It's yours. You buy it. and that was it. Whatever I replaced it with, I think cost $1 more, and he loaned me the $1 for the other book. So it wasn't like it was, he was just being a jerk. He wanted that Amazing Spider-Man 25, and he was going to get it no matter what, and he did. So he bested me that day.
Don't move in on someone else's collection, Tom. I guess that's the lesson. Well, now that I feel just like utterly defeated by all this. Now, annuals count, and like playing interference with other people's comics. I do kind of want to turn the conversation here to, we obviously referred to this when we started, but just to kind of address the current state of affairs. Obviously over the last couple of weeks, where we have found ourselves living in a new world, so to speak, one that's probably a little confusing and scary. But since, in addition to being an editor, Tom, I've always viewed you also as a historian of comics. Can you talk a little bit about the role superhero comics can play in times like these times of like social crisis, economic crisis? I mean, and do you see Marvel addressing the current situation in the not so distant future in the comics themselves? I
don't know that we'll do a story that's specifically about the coronavirus in the books while it's happening, that seems like it has all the potential to go wrong and be offensive to people who are dealing with a very, very difficult thing. Maybe as assuming, hopefully, the situation gets better and we have a little distance from it, we might do stories that touched on it directly. What I think we're more likely to do is stories that, speak to the situation metaphorically, which is what we tend to do best anyway. In terms though of what comics can do in a case like this, this is a time where suddenly everybody, like it or not, has a little bit more free time for themselves, and has a need to be kind of taken away from the very real troubles that everybody is grappling with. And comics as an entertainment medium, like any other, is one thing that can do that. And because most of our creators already work scattered around the world and work mostly in studios by themselves, we're one of the very few entertainment mediums that, at least so far, has not shut down, completely. Right this moment, nobody's making movies, nobody's making television programs. You can't get enough people together. It's too dangerous. But we can still make comics, and so the Marvel machine is continuing on, at a distance, at a remote, with everybody even more alienated from one another than we usually are, to create these stories of these characters triumphing over adversity and doing fantastical things that can take you away from the problems in your life for 10 or 20 minutes. And hopefully we'll continue to be able to produce those and distribute those so that people can get a break and an escape from the truly awful situation that we're all dealing with around the globe. There's really, there's been nothing like this in my lifetime. And you really kind of have to go back to World War II or the Depression to find anything that would equal it. So it's a scary moment, but in those times, not so much the Depression, because the comic field was only just getting started then, but certainly during the First World War, comics were a great source of entertainment and certainly comfort to people who were fighting overseas and were far away from home. And it's not quite the same thing now, but just the fact that our medium is simple and portable, it sucks right now to be a comic book retailer. You're a cash and carry business for the most part. You rely on a regular weekly clientele, but those guys are survivors. And we've already seen, I'm sure you've seen it, hopefully the shops that you frequent have found ways to do things like curbside pickup and home delivery for their regular customers and so forth, things that can keep a pipeline of material going from them to the audience. And people can continue to read and get a steady stream of Marvel books. And then obviously, the in hushed tones, digital as well. Whether it's through the Marvel app, Comixology, the Marvel Unlimited subscription service, or whatnot. That's a real easy way to get a steady stream of new Marvel material if you're trapped and suddenly have hours to fill, that you didn't have before.
Tom, hitting on that note, a lot of our listeners have expressed a fear to us that after this crisis, it's likely that their local comic stores could be forced to close up shop, like you were saying. What do you think Marvel can do to help stem the tide in a situation like this? I saw that, Marvel's offering kind of like a 15% additional discount, but do you think there's, a possibility that they could go further, do something like what Image is doing, where they're accepting returns on the products for 60 days? Do you think that's something that Marvel is considering?
Well, look, this is honestly something that I really can't speak to directly. It's not really appropriate for me to do so, given that, it's not just Marvel, it's the larger Disney organization over top, and there's a lot of people involved. And right now we're just talking off the cuff. I wouldn't know well enough what I was talking about. All I can tell you for sure is, our team is monitoring the situation very closely. We're in constant contact with retailers across the globe to find out what's going on, at their stores and what can be done to help in a meaningful fashion. And, we'll continue to do that. Hopefully if there's other things that we can do that are legitimate and achievable, we'll do that as well. We're taking this very seriously. There's a couple of other things that we have in the pipeline that we're talking about that will also help in a relief effort manner, but we're not really ready to say anything about that yet. And like I say, I've just, particularly now when I've been out of the office and everyone's been out of the office for like 12 days, I haven't had enough direct conversations with people to know exactly where the ball lies and everything is. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to tell you anything that's wrong or off the cuff.
Sure, I'm not trying to get you off the cuff. It's just a genuine fear that a lot of people are having right now. I think a lot of people really connect to the medium of comics through the kind of like local store experience, maybe less today than they used to, but I know it's an essential part of my comics buying experience is kind of walking into those stores, and I think everybody's afraid about everything right now.
No, I think you're right, and I think that fear is it's an understandable response to an unknown situation, and the reality is nobody knows. We don't know how long this is going to go on for. We don't know what other changes are pending, or what's yet to come. So, like everybody, we're all going to have to react to it in the moment and do our best to cope with the situation as it arises. Beyond that, like I say, I don't have anything concrete. I'd love to be able to give you a more solid bit of hope or
sure.
A light, and please understand that we take it obviously very seriously. It is our livelihood as well as that of those comic book retailers. So this is not something that we're casual with, but it is enormously complicated. I don't want to get too much into the Image thing, but Image has their own problems right now as a result of the steps that they took. And that they maybe should have talked with some people about that a little bit more before making that move.
I can't claim to understand how any of it works. So, I read different press releases and go, I wonder how that all works. So good to hear from you that like everybody is treating it as seriously as like we all kind of really want you to treat it, which makes sense. It's your business,
Tom, just to kind of bring this back to the some of the comics themselves and what have you, Marvel being always known as the world outside your window, probably. And I know that these situations aren't completely not a perfect analogy, but, I can't help but think about the September 11th issue of Amazing Spider-Man during times like this. I mean, can you speak a little bit about the importance of that issue in terms of both Spider-Man canon and Marvel history? And I mean, again, I know that you said that, we're probably, you probably wouldn't have the coronavirus be addressed in the same way, but I don't know, just
right.
Is there any kind of connection in terms of like how that event was addressed and what that kind of meant for both Marvel, but also what was going on in the real world at the time?
Yeah, I think the difference obviously is, and I don't mean to trivialize the awfulness that was 9/11 by putting it this way. Those terrorist attacks happened and they were done. By that morning, it was over, and all you were dealing with was the wreckage and the fallout, and so even though, we moved very, very quickly, Marvel, to do both the Spider-Man issue and the Heroes Benefit book and got those done in only a couple of weeks. And, those wounds were still very fresh at that time. The actual event was finished. It was done, whereas the current situation with the coronavirus is ongoing. It's still happening. And that, I think, is the difference in terms of trying to craft a story now that speaks meaningfully to what we're dealing with. We don't know what's going to happen next. And until we have enough distance to be able to contextualize this communal experience and try to, get a shape of it, it's foolish and maybe even reckless to try to do that story right now. That having been said, going back to 9/11, Marvel is a New York-based company, has been pretty much ever since it started in the 30s. The day of 9/11, when the first tower was hit, I would have been walking from my train station to the Marvel offices. We were far enough uptown that you couldn't, you had no idea it was happening. You wouldn't have heard or seen anything there. But we were all right there in Midtown as that happened, playing out in real time. We all saw the second tower get hit live on television on the little screens that we'd all cobbled together in the bullpen to get, a sense of what was going on in the world and try to figure out what the hell was happening. And I came in the next day. I came in on 9/12 because I was stupid. I'd stay at like 2 a.m. watching coverage, and I called into the Marvel offices, and there was nothing on the Marvel, switchboard that said that we were closing the offices. So I went in the next day, 9/12, and the city looked very much like what the city looks like right now. There was nobody on the streets. There was nothing except for occasionally, some sort of big either troop transport or truck would be driving downtown, and it was kind of an eerie feeling to be walking around in that thing. And so this was obviously an event, even if you weren't in Manhattan, that impacted and affected people very dramatically. And so Joe Quesada and Axel Alonso had talked about wanting to do something in a Spider-Man story, figuring that Spider-Man is pretty much the most New Yorker of all of the Marvel characters. And Axel reached out to JMS, and Joe, took this on board. And, as he tells it, and I think he goes into this in fairly great depth in his autobiography, which just came out, Becoming Superman, on sale at a store near you. He pretty much said that he sat down in, I forget, what show he was working on or, what thing he was doing. He went back to his, makeshift office, and he said it just poured out of him that he just was in almost a fugue state. And he wrote those 20 pages and sent them into Axel. And I remember I read it first as a script. Axel they passed it around to a bunch of us to read, to react to, and to make sure everything was on the up and up. And it was a powerful, moving script even before Johnny got to draw it all. And drawing that comic probably took a few years off of John's life, just because it was so traumatic. And John, he and his family, the Ramirez, they're a real New York family. They're local to the area, and so having to have all of that reference and to be staring at it day after day as you're putting this book together, it had to have been a huge struggle, and it's quite an achievement as a piece of comic book literature. And it was very thoughtful. It was very cathartic. It helped to contextualize a lot of the feelings and give some release to people for all this complicated stuff that they were feeling in the aftermath of that moment. And that's what it did well, that through metaphor, it was able to give you an outlet to process some of the trauma and the stuff that you'd experienced, and, let it exit your body, through the process of experiencing the story. So it really was an awfully good piece of work. And in that moment, it was very much of the moment. Like, you couldn't do it at any other time. And at that point, it really served a need. Not that anybody even necessarily knew that need was quite going to be there. It just seemed like something that at that moment it should have been done. And so that's, I think, as much as anything, that's why people remember it. Not just that it was done, but that it was done so well, and that it did give people, some sort of, not quite closure, but some sort of way to process, all the stuff that they'd been feeling, that had been building up inside them, the anxiety and the fear and the pain and so forth, and kind of, say that it's this happened. we're going to get through this. It's going to be okay. We all have to look out for one another. And that's the same kind of message that I would tend to want to craft in a story we would be doing relating to what we're all going on dealing with right now. And I'm sure it's inevitable. Every creator that we work with is in the midst of this right now, and there's no way it's not going to have an effect on their psyche. And again, once we're out the other side of the tunnel, they're gonna channel those feelings into the stories that they put together. There's no way that they can't. And the question is really how directly that stuff will be expressed, and how much that will be more expressed, again, through metaphor, through situations that tap into those feelings and emotions and experiences, but contextualize them in a superheroic way, so they're distanced enough that it's, in air quotes, safe for people to come and to experience and to feel like, they can deal without having a PTSD moment reading their comic.
Tom, how do you as an editor balance that kind of distance? Something like the recent Champions book has seen these kids kind of go and fight, whether it's in the Middle East, against terrorists that are harming young girls, or, with a situation where there was a school shooting. It seems really kind of directly kind of up against some of these real world things. And I always wonder, because anytime you do that, there's always the risk of, like you said earlier, kind of trivializing it or making it into something that like superheroes can solve, when in the real world, we can't really solve it. And in a way that kind of, there's a risk there. How do you as an editor, when a writer approaches you with a story like this, balance what you think is appropriate and maybe not?
Well, particularly when it comes to stories that deal with, a sensitive subject matter, such as, the school shooting issue at Champions, that's not just down to me. In those instances, I'll be having conversations with the editor-in-chief and with Dan Buckley, our publisher, and with, other folks like potentially Sana Amanat. We'll be getting, Joe Quesada, we'll be getting other people's, opinions and takes on what we're doing, to make sure that we're approaching the questions that are in the book, in a substantial and correct fashion, and that we're not blowing it. Basically, there's the whole oeuvre of Marvel is it's meant to be the real world.
Sure.
And so to some degree, it's only right and proper that we do stories that, at least in metaphor, if not directly, we grapple with what the issues of the time are in whatever time we happen to be making them. And sometimes those become much more fanciful, stories about, guys in strange hidden cities or on other planets or whatnot. But sometimes they're a little more direct and a little closer to home, like the school shooting issue. And individually, hopefully we did all right with that issue, and it made its point and people liked it, and it didn't send heads spinning somewhere. But that's kind of more for the audience to tell you than even for you yourself. All you could do is kind of come to it genuinely and try to be thoughtful and meaningful about what you present to the audience.
Thanks for joining us for a special Amazing Friends episode of the all-new Amazing Spider Talk. Also, a special thanks to Tom Brevoort for coming to talk to us during this unique time. Dan, what's coming down the pike next for our show?
Well, Mark, you never know what the hiatus will bring, except in this case, because next week we're bringing you part 2 of our interview with Tom Brevoort. So not totally a surprise, but I think the content's really great and you guys are going to really love it. Also, we're still planning on launching season 4 of the Amazing Spider Talk on April 22nd. So be there or be square.
But in the meantime, we hope you all especially be safe and healthy and make smart social distancing choices during this coronavirus scare.
In the meantime, did you know that you can join in with our conversation on the Amazing Spider Talk? All you have to do is just call 9 Red Goblin and leave us a message about the show. We'd love to hear from you, and you can hear your voice on the show, just as Jason did at the beginning of this episode. And if you call in with your thoughts on our next show's topic, either the Brevoort interview you heard today or our upcoming discussion about Marv Wolfman's run, we may feature your message at the start of the show.
Speaking of Patreon questions, the best way to get your questions answered by us on the show is by joining our Patreon. Just click on the link in the podcast description or head on over to AmazingSpiderTalk.com. This week, our Patreon subscribers can check their Patreon exclusive podcast feed for a special review of Amazing Spider-Man number 42. Remember, for just $3.99 a month, the price of a new comic, you'll get access to our exclusive new issue reviews, Patreon exclusive episodes, Spider Slack, and mailbag episodes. And depending on your tier, you will also be entered into our monthly raffle where you get to win some great Spider-Man related merchandise.
Yeah, and at $10 a month, you gain access to our seasonal commissions. We'll send you artwork from famous Spider-Man artists exclusively commissioned for our patrons. This time we've got a commission from Max Fiumara depicting the famous fight from your favorite issue, Mark, Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut. Plus, every episode we release a new episode-specific desktop background created for us by artist Nick Cagnetti for our patrons to enjoy.
So check out the Patreon and help support the continued existence of our show.
And if you want to tune into that next episode that we're going to go to, know that you can always enjoy our show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or your podcast player of choice. We'd love to have you along for our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future. Just head on over to AmazingSpiderTalk.com for all the details about where to subscribe. Mark, you got a lot of stuff going on typically. Where can we find you on the internet this week?
You can always go back to the original mothership, which is my Chasing Amazing blog at chasingamazingblog.com. Actually, Tom Brevoort was an early commenter on Chasing Amazing. If you go back to my write-up of Amazing Spider-Man number 297, we had a comment there from Mr. Brevoort on that. You can find me on Twitter at ChasingASMblog, and you can always find my book in bookstores, 100 Things Spider-Man Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. Dan, what do you got going on?
That's really cool. I'm going to have to go back and look at that. I have like a vague memory of that happening.
Yeah, now that I'm saying it, I'm like, wait, do I need to double? I know I had a conversation with him about that post. Was it on the post itself or was it on Twitter? I swear we had a conversation about this, Tom and I, and it ended up being brought up again at New York Comic Con. So if everyone now goes to the site and checks it out and I'm wrong, I'm not lying, okay? Like, I'm not that kind of person.
Well, regardless, we have another conversation happening with him next week for everybody to tune in. And you can find out about that by going to my Twitter, and it's at SupSpiderTalk. You can kind of follow all of my journey through Spider-Man stuff there and comments and yada, yada. And also, check out AmazingSpiderTalk.com. That's the mothership for this very podcast. It's got all of our archives and all of our old articles and stuff. And it's also where we're going to be hosting the video version of the show when we launch it in April. So go check that out.
Of course, a special thank you to Rick Coste, our amazing, spectacular, adjectiveless, web of, sensational, you get it, editor who cut together this very episode. Rick, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and where we can find your work?
As far as my work goes, you can find a lot of it over at rickcoste.com. And you can also check out a brand new show called Rick Coste's Strange Encounters. If you love stories about the paranormal, UFOs, strange things that go bump in the night, you'll love this show. You can find out more about that at strangeencounters.org.
Awesome. Thanks, Rick. Well, Mark, let's bring this thing to a close with the motto we're always sure to remember. So take it away, Mark.
With great podcasts, there must also come the all-new Amazing Spider Talk.
Don't miss the next installment.
Hi, I just wanted to say you guys are my favorite podcast, and the fact that you guys like Ultimate Spider-Man so much, it's really nice.
Hey, Dan, I watch y'all's podcast every night, and I'm finally getting my first Spider-Man comic, of multiple comics, actually. I can't wait. Y'all the best podcast ever. Thank you.
Hey, Mark and Dan, this is Noah calling from Pittsburgh. I just wanted to thank you guys for doing the show. I love listening to it. I started listening to you guys last summer when you were in the middle of that Bronze Age season. And a couple years ago, whenever Homecoming came out, I decided I wanted to read every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, which thanks to Marvel Unlimited is a lot easier to do than it used to be. I read a lot of the Stan Lee stuff. I started to get burnt out, jumped around, did JMS, Brand New Day era. Eventually I had to take a long break, but then whenever I was ready to get back into it, finding you guys' show got me really excited and gave me the motivation to do it. And I've had a great time with it. So I just want to thank you guys for doing what you're doing. Your passion for Spider-Man makes it a blast to listen to you guys all the time. Really scratches that itch to delve deeper into one of my favorite characters ever. So keep it up. I'm excited for season 4. Just want to say, don't sleep on Len Wein, guys. It's not a great run, but there's some gems in there you guys should talk about. Thanks, guys.